DLA Nights. Today I've got with me Peggy Budd, and Peggy and I are going to be talking about unconscious bias and the various blockers and barriers that there are to business through unconscious bias and the area around that. But I don't want to spoil it for you before we get in. Peggy, where can people find you?
They can find me at Peggy, P-E-G-G-Y, at PEGGYBUD.com. My name is right there, and my email is just peggybud.com. So,
Peggy, this is actually the second time you've been on my podcast, isn't it?
yes, it is.
Yeah, it's
Thank you
not very
so much.
many people make it a second time.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm really honored. Thank you. And
Yeah.
it's great to be back and great to talk to you as always. And the topic we're going to talk about today is one of my favorites.
So why don't we, before we get in and why don't we explain to people what is unconscious bias, just so we can get people can understand the context. Let's why don't you just explain it?
Okay. Well, unconscious bias is really our preferences and for whatever it is, whether it's deciding that we want to buy a certain product or we're going to hire a certain person. And a bias means that it's not based on any, strong data or evidence. It's more likely based on our experiences, based on things that we've learned, things that we've seen in the movies, television, read in books, somebody has taught us, how we've been taught. And we do have the ability to have what we call cognitive biases that are innate, meaning that our brains actually have these biases as a way to help us organize and make decisions. Because if our brains didn't have something that helped us make a decision, we could spend forever in the aisle at the supermarket deciding, which type of cola to purchase if we didn't have a preference. So therefore, bias isn't always bad. What's bad about it is if we use it as the only factor in making a decision.
For example, if I only got white, bald, male, middle class men onto this podcast, that would probably be deemed as a bias.
I would say definitely so.
Yes.
and especially if you went back and looked at why you
Yeah.
only brought those people on your butt. And I think that's what is so important is people have to start understanding who and why they're making these decisions and not just look at it's wrong. And too many people say, first of all, a lot of people tell me I'm not biased. And
Yeah.
I'm saying, no, we all are biased.
Yeah.
And second of all, bias isn't always bad. So don't, beat yourself up. Just make sure that you understand what you're doing and why.
So there's also two words that often come up when we talk about unconscious bias, which is equity and equality. Explain to me what we mean by these.
Okay. When we look at bias, to me, bias is the biggest barrier for any organization having diversity, equity, and inclusion. And equity is different than equality.
Okay,
And I
explain to
guess
me the difference then.
I will explain to you the difference.
Please.
And I think I found this example recently, and I thought it was a great idea. First of all, equality means that equal, it's fair. Everybody's going to get the same thing. Equity means that everybody's going to get what they need. So within an organization, everybody doesn't need the same thing to be successful or to have, but we want to make sure that everybody has equal opportunities for success, and that may look differently. But let's look at the difference between equity and equity and equality in a really easy way.
Please.
Think of us all standing, we want to see something and we're all standing in front of a fence. Okay. And none of us can see over that fence. And we want to watch, that baseball game or the cricket game or the whatever, soccer game.
Football game, yeah.
Football game, whatever. And we're standing there. And so now we say, oh, well, we're going to give everybody a box to stand on. And now everybody can watch over the fence. That's equality, right? You think that's a good idea, Tim?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Well, guess what? What happens if these boxes are all, 3 feet high? Well, what happens if one person is, a little kid and he's only, 3 feet high himself? He's still not going to be able to see over the fence. And so it not only is that giving them the same box, but the same box isn't going to make them equal anymore. What everybody needs a different height box. So think about those people and think about them all standing on a box. And now we've got the tall, the medium, and the short. The tall person, yeah, now he can see or she can see over. The other two still can't. So we were equal. Everybody got an equal 3-foot box, but they really didn't have equal access.
Yes.
Does that explain it?
Yes, it does. Yes, that's an excellent example. Thank you. So moving on, in terms of we now understand unconscious bias, and we understand equity and equality. What types of diversity are there?
Okay, well, we can look at diversity now. If you ask somebody, well, what is diversity? Obviously, you're going to get the top three are probably going to be race is probably going to be one, gender is going to be two, or flip them, and and then you've got age, which is very much out in the news today. But we've got everything else. You've got background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? What is your your religion? What are people who are, we can have bias. This person's athletic, this person isn't. I mean, you name an attribute about somebody, we can have a bias against it. And that's what's really, I find, interesting. And then we also have biases of ideas. We think things are a certain way because that's how we do it. I was just sharing with you a little while ago. People are even biased to being right-handed, yes, because most people are right-handed. I mean, think about everything in our world. I mean, even think about a notebook. When you have a notebook where the spiral is on a notebook.
My brother is left-handed.
And right.
I remember, there was some conversation about something or other, and he said, it's like, you're using it a bit funny. He's like, well, yes, because it's designed for a right-handed person.
Like, correct.
And
nobody right, and when the people designed that notebook, now you can buy notebooks for left-handed people.
Right.
But otherwise, and with that kind of notebook, you could just, turn it over and basically open it backwards. But there are so many things that in life that we just take.
I think you gave an example of Google that designed something for right-handed people.
Right. Google many years ago was designing a mobile app for uploading, I think, videos. And so they put their team together. They created this great app. Everything was fine. And then they started getting complaints. And when they investigated it, what they realized is that the software engineers were all right-handed. So they made this leap of just, conclusion that everybody was right-handed, I guess, and they never even thought to check out whether, if you were left-handed, the way you held your phone, the way you did things, to upload something would be different. And so they had to actually go back and redesign the app, which cost them money.
Yes.
And led them to understand that maybe they should start talking to people about their biases, and so that they didn't make these same mistakes twice.
So is diversity good in an organization? I mean, is there any research that shows that diversity is good?
Absolutely. And actually, just recently, I keep following the McKinsey reports, and they keep saying the same thing, that diverse organizations are more profitable. And this is continuing to be true, that diverse organizations will earn more than their industry peers. So it doesn't matter. And they outperform by 30 to 40%. We know that as as an organization. We also know that even there's been research about boards of directors. The same thing is true. And one of the reasons this is because the more diverse you are, the more different ideas that come, so that you are definitely better problem solvers when you have a diverse mindset. And again, remember that diversity isn't just gender, it's age, religion, background, education. I was talking to a company to do some work with them, and it turned out that almost everyone in their company had been educated at the same university. You know,
Yeah.
you'll see, and well, that university was an excellent university, but guess what? They were all taught the same way, and you're not getting diversity of ideas and the ability to be creative.
Will's just made a comment. He said, "I can't believe he's talking to me. Can't believe you kept your face straight when I was asked about the benefit of diversity in organisations." He knows I'm very passionate about diversity in organisations because we have a diverse organisation, and what it does is it stops us from being blindsided. It's so easy to go into meetings and say the answer is this, and I have people in my team that will go, "The answer, no, actually, the answer is this," and you go, "Of course it is." And it's like what you know and you know I've got a lot of people in my team that challenge, and their challenges are usually right.
Right.
And so the diversity is so critical. I mean, I would say that I'm going to be so bold as to say the diversity in our team is a unique selling point. It's a competitive advantage.
Oh, well, the research will support that. It says that
Yeah.
you're more profitable because you can see things through different lenses and different angles, and that's important. And you're more open to, I think, when you have diverse thinking, you are not only a better problem solver, but you oftentimes come up with basically a new voice, a new idea. It's not that, oh, this is the right answer and this is the right answer. Diversity allows us to look at everything and create something that neither or none of the people themselves would have thought about. And that doesn't happen unless you are really
You
a diverse and open thinker.
you talked earlier on about an exercise about looking at your friends and colleagues and making a list, didn't you?
Sure, there's an activity, and anybody can do this within your company. You can do this yourself as a way to reflect. Sit down, and you can start with your 10 circle of friends, and you have to leave out family, and so you don't want to include them in that circle of friends, even though I know a lot of us, our trusted friends are people in our families. If you look at that list, and after you've made the list of the 10 people, start to look at the characteristics, and look at how many, check off how many of those people are you're the same gender as you, how many of them are the same race, your age, where you went to school. And then let's think about things. Where did you grow up? If you grew up in England versus Alabama in the United States, or you grew up in, any other, any country, each country has their culture. Different parts of the United States and often different parts of countries have different cultures. That is another diversity, is everybody from that same mindset. Um, think about some of your interests, your religion, all those things, and characteristics, and what you're going to find of your closest friends, your trusted friends that you're going to shout to when you want to have a problem, are just like you. And going to what you just said, Tim, how can you really get great ideas if all your trusted friends are just like you?
And Will's made a great comment here as well. And allied to bringing a sense of curiosity to understand where that difference comes from. Isn't that lovely?
Oh, I love it. That is great. And it is so true, because if we're not open to that, we are really living in sort of this little box. And we're missing so many great things that could happen and experiences by it goes to that perspective taking part of understanding and including people and being an inclusive organization has to be when we're diverse, understanding other people's perspective, not agreeing with them, but just understanding them. Why did they think this? What were their experiences? How did they feel? And that also helps you be more inclusive in your mind than ideas.
So, what can organisations do to make sure that they're not biased and not have this unconscious bias?
Okay, the first thing is really doing, and I'm going to say training in a, with quotes, but in the sense you need to really do need to have ongoing conversations and facilitated training that's going to help people really understand all the nuances of bias, which we have basically just touched. It's like the tip of the iceberg. And because until you really understand how you're biased, why you're biased, and understand who other people are and why they are coming with certain biases. And remember, bias isn't bad. So it is, that's important. And then once you're having those conversations, also remember that when we are in a meeting or having a decision, that we start to recognize that and call people out if they are doing something. Well, why do you think that? That's an important thing. And then thinking about, since bias impacts, let's say, performance reviews. I don't know if you know this, but about 60% of what we bring to a performance review is our bias. So we go to evaluate somebody and we already have all these biases about them, maybe something that we saw, because remember, a first impression takes 5 seconds, but it takes a lot longer to change it. So if we already knew something about them at one point and we saw them doing something that we didn't like, we're going to remember that. That's going to be a bias. So it affects that aspect of what we're doing. We have to remember that it affects everything that's going on in the company, in the organization, whether it's your performance review, whether it's your negotiations, whether it's how you react in regards to your clients. You have to think about where are your biases and what are you doing. So those are all really important, and calling people out on them, because our biases sometimes veer their heads as microaggressions, which are unintentional comments that we think or say, or behaviors. And those will also, if we don't start becoming aware of them and then holding people accountable, that will really not open up diversity and equity and inclusion in any organization.
I've been talking to a lot of talent acquisition leaders recently for a little project that we're doing. And they say that, or a couple of them have been saying that it's also not just a case of one-off training. It's also a case of keep doing it, because what happens is that people tend to have this comfort zone, and they go, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be with bias, and then gradually, it creeps back in again.
It does, and I think that most of the time that's what people do. Oh, we have to do it one off. We check the box. And to me, it's that understanding, because bias impacts everything. So it's first you have to really understand your biases and really feel comfortable with that. And then you have to look at all the different aspects of your organization. What are your policies and procedures? How do you go about making a decision? I was using an example with a client, and I was saying, think about your bias and how words matter. And our biases, I was talking about words. So if I say, well, I don't want to, I saw that company, I went and, their facility is old. Now, that could conjure up, and you could say, oh, forget this. This is bad. It has old. It's antiquated. Well, maybe I meant old is they have a very charming building and there's a lot of history there. So how my bias on a word and your bias on a word may be different. So starting to think about the language we use, how we communicate, what does it mean, and then having conversations. So if I say old, You say, well, digging deeper. Well, what do you mean by that? Yeah, I saw that they had a really charming facility, or there was a lot of history there, or you're right, it's old, it needs a lot of renovation, and this is going to be too costly, so we can't do it.
Yeah, I've
Oh,
just Beth has just made this comment about she's been reading about in Matthew Said's books. I must admit, Beth, if you could put a note in which one that is, because I've only read a couple of Matthews and not read all of his, and it would be great if we could know what that is. I'm reading one at the moment about feedback. And the fact that there's actually differences, and Will know this, there's a difference between feedback, mentoring, and so your comments have to be very, very careful at the way that it's actually structured. Oh, Will's already come back. Rebel ideas. There we go. Thank you.
thank you. I'm writing that down. No, it's Beth, it's so true. We have to really look at it, because all of these, whether it's the language we use, and so often, as George Bernard Shaw said, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Yes.
So what happens is we think we were clear, but somebody misunderstood it, misinterpreted, had their own biases that they used to understand that, which is why not only can it not be a one-off training, but it can't just be a level one type conversation. In order to have good, effective bias and diversity training, you have to dig deep. You have to have deep conversations that really go to not only the what, but the why and the how and what's going on, so that we can really understand each other.
Peggy, it's a fascinating subject. We've got a great lot of discussion going on as well. So thank you, Will, Beth, and Andrew, for jumping in and discussing things today. Unfortunately, the 20 minutes goes very quickly, Peggy. So the time is up. But remind people where they can get hold of you.
Sure. You can reach me at peggy@peggybud.com, or please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Peggy Solomon Budd on LinkedIn, and I also have a website, peggybud.com, so you can go out there and you can send me a note through there. So anyway, I'm here. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to continue this conversation with you in another Zoom call. Absolutely. Or help your organization, whatever. And thank you, Tim. This was great. It's a favorite topic, and I hope we got people thinking.
Hopefully, so and start the debate. Because it's a subject that's very close to me. I know my father was a massive, big supporter of diversity. I spoke about it yesterday, and he was doing this 40 years ago, and was supporting diverse people with diverse backgrounds, and that 45 years ago. And I think it's such an important subject.
It is. And I agree with William that communication is done on the listener's terms. But I'm just going to add to that, and in the sense that we are in a communication at any moment, we are each the listener. So, yes. I think we need to think about that. So we're always, because when you're talking, I'm the listener, but when I'm talking, you're the listener. And that's what communication is. So it is done on the listener's terms, but we're always, it's a yin and a yang of listeners.
Yes. Peggy, thank you so much for coming in, and thank you everybody for all the chat today as well. It's been excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.